Hello, and welcome to another episode of Candor Beach's podcast. Today, we'll be talking to you about what auto manufacturers aren't telling us. So, let's kick things off with why EV. Why EV, Sailesh?
So on the face, it's for the emissions, so they're gonna tell us, yeah, it's for carbon neutrality, um,
The
all
sales
the
pitch.
jargon we hear, right? Yeah, the sales pitch. So, but then you look back at the value chain, there's a lot more they're not telling us, right? So you look at the mining of cobalt or lithium. It's super carbon intensive process. It's mining them in third world countries. Like most of lithium comes from, or cobalt comes from, like Africa. So is it okay to have highly carbon intensive processes in Africa and not in America or Europe?
See, the thing with that is, I agree with you. The developing world has a lot of these mines. There was a conversation about how um, China dominated.
Mm-hmm.
They held a lot of mining rights over over a majority of the mines in Africa. Then
Yeah.
there are cobalt nickel mines in uh, up in Russia, and obviously the war has
Mm.
affected production and the supply chain there as well. So, but circling back to whether it's better for the environment or not, we're told to focus on the emissions, and obviously EV cars don't have emissions. But when we are looking at emissions from mining, when we're looking at the effect on mining, like the land pollution that you have to endure,
Yeah.
the risks that people are taking today, because cobalt, nickel, you get high rates for mining them, and so there are individuals who are
Mm-hmm.
employing children for the mining. Like, if you thought about ECG, if you think of EVs being better for ECG, think again. They're a terrible impact. They hurt society. They
Yeah.
hurt the environment. But yeah, like the final product, there are no emissions. That is true. And we're not even talking about
So
resale or disposal. We're just talking about
yeah,
average running.
I mean, if you look also at it, so we're going to come to the point where, yeah, the EVs are good for the environment because there's the rising fuel costs, the fuel is going up, and it's also controlled by a group of
Conglomerate.
countries,
Yeah.
yeah, like OPEC countries, right? So if you come back to that point, do they, and then we have another argument, we can say most of the grid is supported by fossil fuels. How much of EV is offsetting that, because you're charging from a fossil fuel based energy, right? So what are your thoughts on the fuel, which is powering the EVs?
I think you've captured a majority of what I'd have wanted to say. That
Okay.
it,
Just
it
the fuel, rising fuel prices too, it actually
fuel prices
takes a
are
lot.
fuel prices are largely contingent on supply and demand. So when you
Hmm.
reduce supply, and you already alluded to that, like OPEC decides on what the
Yeah.
supply is going to be. OPEC plus, if you're considering Russia as well. Now they
Yeah.
decide on what the fuel prices are going to be. But contrary to popular belief, fuel as we know it is not necessarily a scarce resource. Like, we've been led to
Yeah.
believe that fossil fuels are a limited commodity, but
Hmm.
then the Middle East wouldn't have the kind of hold that they have around the world if
Yeah.
that were entirely true. Like, if they truly did extract and refine at the rate at which they could, then we wouldn't be paying prices or we wouldn't be seeing prices at what was Brent crude at last? Like, let's just say $100 a barrel. Like, that's some of the
Yeah.
prices that we've been seeing. So
Hmm.
we wouldn't see prices at 100. We'd see prices at maybe a third or less. So it's not a scarce
Yeah.
quantity in any which way. We'd also have to look at substitutes. Like, when you're thinking about fuels, you could say that ethanol blending, as an example, that's all the rage
Yeah.
in India, particularly, right? But
Hmm.
again, like at the end of the day, all of this is contingent upon the price setters, the people who are controlling supply demand, the people who are establishing what the price should be. Because even when you're talking about ethanol blending, there is an entity that's telling you what quantity of ethanol you can blend into your fuel. There are entities that control engines that can deal with a certain degree of ethanol in them. Like they need a certain
Yeah.
octane level. Um, but yeah, like for the average Joe, the EVs are not going to make a large dent on are not going to make a large dent on prices. They're not going to be much better for the environment. And I
If
think
that's the
with
case,
yeah,
why is it still, why is it still, is it a fad, or is it still gonna go? Is it like, because it's novelty, or what do you think about that?
I
It's
think
still a
a
huge craze.
large part of predictions in terms of how many EV vehicles are going to be sold were based on interests that innovators and early adapters showed. Think the
Hmm.
innovation adoption curve. So you have your
Yeah.
innovators, your early adapters, your early majority, late majority laggards. So the innovators and early adapters made a lot of noise about it. The rest of the world, obviously, like you sell a nice story about um, emission-free vehicles that are better for the environment. Who's going to say no to that? But
Mm.
yeah, that's obviously like before you look under the
Yeah,
hood.
that's on the
But
face value. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But
I
I
mean,
I think a lot
government
of the
policies also help.
yeah, yeah, so I would say that a large amount of the prediction was based on what early adapters and innovators said, and then because of which other companies oriented themselves towards EVs, like after firmly swearing off of it. Like I think Ford, General Motors, when they first heard of Tesla and what Tesla was trying to do, they weren't going to sign up for that. Even today in F1, they're firmly against EVs, even though you have a Formula E. Um, but yeah, because of the ESG push, the subsequent ESG push, and how EVs fit into that narrative, like at least in the public eye, governments have oriented themselves towards EVs as well. They've been trying to build
Mm.
EV infrastructure, and there are policies to manufacture more EVs.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a huge push, right? So, I mean, if we talking about this particular point, what are the problems of EVs? Like, what do you actually see? What do people encounter when they purchase an EV?
Well, first and foremost, I would say infrastructure. The
Mm.
infrastructure, particularly in developing countries, isn't there yet. You have countries in Europe
Yeah.
that have charging stations. You have countries in Europe that have functioning charging stations. It's
Mm.
a key operating word because in India, apparently, there's charging stations that haven't been inaugurated and therefore don't work. Or there are charging stations that are
Yeah.
geared for a certain vehicle but not for others.
Yeah. Compatibility. Yeah.
And that creates range anxiety, that creates
Yeah.
inconvenience
Huge.
primarily, right? Like picture, like say you're driving down you're just like on a long drive, and then suddenly like you make these plans to go further, go elsewhere. You can't change plans because you are going to have to make sure that you have enough fuel, so to say, enough charge to get to that other place. Now
Hmm.
with hybrid vehicles or with your traditional ICEs, you just go in, find a pump, refuel, and you're good to go. But with an EV,
Yeah.
you have to consider like a 20-minute stop somewhere where you're going to have to go and charge your vehicle. That's not something that people
Hmm.
typically plan for. We're not used to planning for that, right? We're used to like
Yeah.
a 2-minute refuel.
So if you another thing is, I don't think the grids can support it, man. The
Mm,
grids, if you look at the American grid about consumes in 2019 they consumed about 4,100 billion kilowatt hours. Kilowatt hours, one unit, right? So, and then if all the vehicles go EV, it's going to consume anywhere from 800 to 1,900 billion kilowatt hours. That's about 20 to 50% of just the regular usage. So
Wow.
that's half of it basically. So how much of it can the grid really support is different. You can have all the charging points you want, but then if you don't have the enough power, how are you going to support charging, right?
Yeah, just to
It
put that into
happened.
perspective, the Las Vegas Sphere, that massive thing, it consumes 95,800 megawatt hours per year.
Oh wow.
And what did you
Yeah.
say the EVs were going to consume?
So EV is going to consume about, if you go all EV, 1900 billion kilowatt hours. So 1900 billion, I don't know. I have to figure out the conversion.
19,000, I think. 19,000
Yeah,
million megawatt hours.
yeah,
I'm not good with my
kilowatt
zeros,
hours.
so let's just.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's huge, man. Like that is another issue. You can have all the EVs in the world, but then if your grid can't support it, you have to increase capacity.
Yeah. Now, the reason I brought up the sphere was because they were talking about how, like, the monthly usage can power 21,000 homes.
Mm,
Yeah, so that times
yeah.
12.
Remember, we had that the power crunch which happened last year during, and California had to tell all its residents to stop charging their EVs because they didn't have enough capacity on their grid. That was a complete use case
I didn't
scenario.
know that.
Like,
Okay.
yeah, there was a huge power crunch,
Hmm.
and they told everybody to lower their thermostats. Don't put their ACs at full blast, and lower and basically don't charge the EVs. And California is basically the leading state, which is stopping ICE cars by 2035. So a state like that is going through that crunch. It tells you how weak the technology, like their the rules are based on, right? So I mean, there
Move,
was a lot of outcry about it.
moving to an Indian use case, we have
Hmm.
instances where the government, at this point in time, the government is not going to give you a separate meter for your electric vehicles. So, what the
Yeah.
government says is like plug it into your home meter. And that
Hmm.
doesn't make sense because, like, if you do that, you're like, in India at least, you're paying prices per, like, per unit consumption, and your rates are tiered. So at a certain tier,
Mm,
you pay a certain rate. Now add an
mm.
electric vehicle to that, and so the next time you run your refrigerator or your television or your computer, you're automatically paying that much more because you have an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
That's not going to sit very well with the Indian consumer. All
Yeah,
right,
I
so
mean, the Indian consumer is price sensitive, right? So we have
yeah,
a lot more to discuss about that. We
tell
could talk
me,
about that in
yeah, but
another part.
yeah, talk to me about battery related problems. We've dealt with
Oh
infrastructure.
yeah, I got a lot of it. So think of it like overheating, man. Overheating and fire hazard. If you're driving the car and all of a sudden it overheats, and it might catch fire. You never know. It happened just now with the cars. It happened with a lot of EV scooters in India. There was overheating problems in the first launch of Ola vehicles, right? Remember the Ola S1 Pros caught on fire. There were so many scooters which got caught on fire,
And
and
that was in the
there
showroom
was,
itself, right?
yeah, 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 and so there was a lot of problems with it. So
I
that
would
is one
say
of the major
I would say we
fear.
should start by, like, EVs are new, electric vehicles are new, but the underlying technology is not necessarily completely novel. It's a very
Yeah.
quite a cop out, right? Not necessarily completely novel,
Yeah.
but think of it as a smartphone. Like, smartphones use
Yeah.
lithium ion batteries. Your EVs use lithium ion batteries. What they say is, but the thing with a smartphone is you're using them largely indoors. Whereas with
Mm.
a vehicle, it's subject to road temperatures, it's subject to the harsh sun, and subject to the harsh sun over a long period of time, unlike your electronic devices, which are probably in your pockets or bags for the most part.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the issues that, say, your phone or your computer would face? Controlled operating temperatures. Like in very
Mm.
cold temperatures, the battery might not fire up. When it's very hot, like I have an iPhone. Sailesh, I know you don't care for Apple that much, but there are instances like when the battery gets too hot, they cut off charging altogether. They're just
Yeah.
like, we're waiting for the temperature to come down before resuming charging. So there is a zone, a range for when you from where, between which you can charge your phone. Then I would say that with electric vehicles, the efficiency the efficiency is inversely correlated with the speeds. What I'm getting at
Yeah.
is like at up to a certain speed, it's all good. At higher speeds, it's consuming twice as much battery, which is the opposite of what
Mm.
we're used to right now with ICEs. You
Yeah.
consume it's more efficient as you climb to higher speeds.
So at this point, like I can bring up another thing, right? So there is something called C rate.
Hmm?
So the rate at which a battery can discharge or charge, so a phone, you don't have to make it charge or discharge at a very high speed. But on a vehicle, you need if you want high acceleration, there needs to be high discharge of the battery. So if you're trying to overload the battery by trying to discharge a 1 or 2C battery at a very high acceleration, that's going to overload the battery and heat it up and might explode. So
Understood.
that is, yeah, that is another hazard in there. Well, like another big thing is like, let's say you're driving, most of these batteries are on the undercarriage of the car. Well, what if you bump onto something? The entire battery is destroyed.
So the ground clearance becomes an issue again.
Yeah,
Man, like you put on
you
those
gotta be.
glasses and like all that's missing today is a lab coat.
No, I mean these are the problems, like, and then a Tesla, you cannot even, like, change your own tire on a Tesla. You have to flatbed tow it
Yeah,
so
but
to the
that's a
nearest.
nuance, I think. That's a nuance.
Yeah,
It's not true of all electric vehicles. Uh,
yeah.
let's look at a couple of other problems as well. We touched upon disposal when we were talking about the
Hmm.
environmental related, like the ESG impact of an EV, of manufacturing an EV. Disposal of batteries is going to become a problem because they are
Hmm.
hazardous materials at this point in time.
Yeah.
Like until battery technology improves, until you see like hydrogen fuel cells as an example come
Yeah.
in, or those air batteries that people are talking about, right? Like a bunch of IITians are apparently working on that.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, until you see battery technology evolve, at this point in time, disposal of batteries is inconvenient. Finally, I would say that when it comes to resale values, let's say you at 5 years down the line you decide that you want to upgrade your car because that's what you're used to. So let's
Yeah.
push it to like 7 years or 10 years.
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah, when you're trying to upgrade your car, what's your resale value on your current electric vehicle? You've spent
So
more than you would
yeah,
for an ICE, and you get no
yeah, and then
resale.
your battery, by the time you sell by 10 years, your battery is exhausted, right? So you have to put in a new battery to actually sell that car in the market, which is about 50% of your original value of the car. Let's say
And
you buy it at $40,000 and the battery itself costs 20,000.
there
That
is
is,
amortization of the vehicle's cost automatically, right? So
yeah,
amortization will affect resale value, perhaps not, but irrespective,
depreciation.
yeah.
Just the car depreciation, the entire car depreciation is going to take a huge hit on resale value. So that's something people have to think about too.
Yeah, I used the wrong word. I didn't mean amortization, depreciation. You're right.
Depreciation, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the problem with EVs right now. So
Hmm.
why are people making EVs? Why do brands want EVs?
it's a novelty, man. Everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon, right? It's like the ESG thing.
No, so when EVs first came out, like when Tesla first started making a lot of noise about electric vehicles, there were people like the Fords and the General Motors, or these manufacturers weren't too keen on EVs. It was just Tesla that was
Yeah,
sold on that future. Tesla
yeah,
also enabled it by making sure that they floated a bunch of their trademarks, their IPs. They floated a bunch of their IPs, made it free so that people could build towards the same future, which was a smart move on Elon's part. But
yeah.
why did these companies jump on that bandwagon?
So first, it's if you look, it's new, man. And it's a new market, right? So
Hmm.
they wanted to make money, right? So everybody's talking about the carbon neutrality, but they didn't have a solution for it, right? So they wanted to go towards carbon neutral, but what is the solution for to go carbon neutral is EV. I mean, at the face value,
Sales
but
pitch.
that's not what. Yeah, sales pitch, right? So that's what that was the biggest. I mean, it's a scam of the century, right? So
All right, so that's fair. I think another thing with novelty is you don't know how to price novelty. There's price
yeah.
discovery, and when you're like, let's take FMCG companies very briefly. FMCG is fast moving consumer goods. Now, your fast
Hmm.
moving consumer goods would constitute of, let's say, like your shampoos or soaps.
Yeah,
Now, when you see an inflationary market, prices go up, and that price is passed on to the consumer. And because consumers
yeah,
need these products, you can't do away with soap, as an example. You need to take a shower, you need soap. You are going to pay those elevated prices. Now, when inflation comes down and costs go down, the company, the FMCG brand, is not going to suddenly reduce the price out of some altruism. They're going to keep the
yeah,
prices high. I feel
yeah.
like
Agreed.
one of the things that EVs have produced is it's an entirely new white space, and it encourages price discovery, and this price discovery leads to potentially new revenue, not a new revenue stream, but new profits. Like you can
Yeah,
suddenly command uh you can suddenly command higher prices
basically a new vertical,
comfortably.
all in all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So since we talked about EVs, right? So what do you think will be the future of EV tech in commercial vehicles or aircrafts or airplanes or EV tolls? What do you think? Where are those headed in electrifying them?
So I saw a bunch of these YouTube shorts where I think
Mhm.
Elon Musk was on a Joe Rogan podcast, and there's also
Mm,
uh, Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about this,
mm,
talking about vertical takeoff vehicles.
yeah,
Now, people are interested in that, but I think Elon, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Elon was talking about how you'd have to overcome gravitational potential energy, and that's a big load on the battery. It automatically reduces how much you could do with a certain amount of with a certain capacity of battery and a certain amount of charge. So
yeah,
EV tolls are something that are interesting. That is something that I believe there are companies that are exploring right now, and it will likely come to market. I don't know whether we'll see mass adoption just yet, because you are also going to have to consider city landscapes, right? Like you're going to have to consider, um, as an example, skyscrapers. Like picture
mm.
flying vehicles in New York City might not be very fun, or Chicago, right? Like the windy city. There will be issues
So
that you're going to run into, which was why Elon talked about the Boring Company and Hyperloop, where
yeah.
you explore the opposite end, like instead of flying up, go down. But that seems like a very expensive notion.
So if you dig deeper a little bit about the Elon Musk interview with Joe Rogan, right? He talks about the gravitational potential energy, and for an aircraft to become completely EV, it needs a certain density of like battery storage capacity to actually escape the gravity, stay up on go up to a certain altitude, and when you're coming down, you can gain the energy back. But to take off and stay up in a certain altitude, it needs around like 500 watt hours a kg of energy per storage, and that storage actually was done by a company called CATL. Just recently they launched it. So that is something new in this tech, right? So in the flying airplane industry of taking the aircraft up in air with battery storage technology.
Okay, and like picture a hybrid vehicle instead, hybrid and eVTOL, because I think another thing that Elon had talked about with respect to whether rockets would go EV, he talked about how
Mm.
propulsion was an important ingredient in sending rockets into space. And to propel, you have to expel something. You have to, like, the fuel or gas has to be jettisoned
Yeah,
out of the vehicle for you to gain that thrust.
you have to lose mass.
Sure. Which
Yeah.
would which could allude to like maybe another future of eVTOLs. They might not. I mean, they might not be electric vehicles that are engaging in vertical takeoff and landing. It could just be a hybrid. I don't know. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not an expert in the field, but that's just something that we could maybe envisage. What about the fuel? Like, do we necessarily have to see electric vehicles in or batteries with lithium ion? Like, what else is going on in the construction of engines and batteries?
Um, good point. We can talk about the hydrogen fuel cells, right? So basically, it's a battery powered by hydrogen as fuel to charge it, right? So hydrogen fuel cells is another major good technology. Actually, will work to be as a replacement for the battery systems, right? The EV based systems.
Yeah, so India is gung ho on hydrogen energy. Like, Reliance is betting on it, Adani is betting on it. Nitin Gadkari, I think last year, came out and talked about how we would see hydrogen powering vehicles soon.
Yeah.
So, but there is a problem with hydrogen right now, right? Like, you have your. I think we talked about this at some point in time in one of our earlier podcasts, but we were talking about green renewable energy, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen from coal, blue hydrogen from
Yeah.
natural gas, and green hydrogen from renewable sources. So
That's correct.
the source of generation of hydrogen is something that we're still working on. We're working on ensuring that as much green hydrogen as possible is produced. But then storage and
Hmm.
transportation is also another challenge that we are yet to overcome.
Yeah.
Because typically
I
you
mean,
want
yeah, it's
to,
it.
like, if you're using wind, you're trying to stay as close to open areas like the sea, as an example. But then,
Mm.
like, transporting that energy, the hydrogen produced all the way from there to where it's going to be consumed, is very expensive at this point in time.
Yeah, the hydrogen storage is actually very like the pressure and the storage itself is it's still there's need to be a lot of research done on that, just the storage part, because it's very flammable, right? You can and it has to be stored at a high pressure. So that makes it, very hard to transport it to like you have to if you want to transport it by road or by or pipelines. I don't know how well it will work with hydrogen and pipelines.
Picture the length of these pipelines.
Yeah, exactly. It's very dangerous. So it's because it's extremely flammable. So
Yeah.
that is something has to work on. So yeah, so let's talk about something interest everybody. So the AI part and the artificial intelligence part in EV technology. What what do you think? is happening there?
I think there are quite a few things to talk about there. To begin with,
Hmm.
you're engaging in AI designing parts now. You don't
Yeah.
like this isn't to say that AI is going to supplant human beings. It's AI is not going to necessarily supplant designers and architects, but it's going to help designers and architects bring pieces to market quicker, because like as an example, AI could design some very fanciful parts, but whether those parts are realistic, like when they're going to fit into the machine, like will this cog hold up, or will it just break under
Hmm.
pressure? Like those are conditions that we're still exploring, and maybe AI will get good enough at some future point where you don't need as much human intervention. But at this point in time, you do need human beings to test out the parameters that AI is designing with.
Yeah.
Another aspect of AI, I think, would be self-driven cars. What are your thoughts about self-driven cars? Like in general, would you get into a Tesla which is able to drive itself?
I'm kind of scared, but yes, I would.
No, I'm saying you're not. You
um,
don't. You're not close to the steering wheel. You're a passenger. You're sitting. You're sitting back, like behind. You're not close to the driver's seat.
Still doesn't matter. I'm not getting it right away. I'm kind of scared. Like I would, but I'm kind of scared. Yeah, of course, you're gonna sit in the back. You're not gonna sit in the front seat.
No, but
Yeah, but
current norms dictate, right? Like you want a
yeah,
driver, a human being, to be able to intervene should that be required.
hmm,
But there have been deaths. It isn't a foolproof
yeah.
piece of technology just yet. Another interesting part when it comes to AI-driven cars is subscriptions.
Oh yeah, man. We could talk about how BMW had subscriptions on heated seats. Now next year they're gonna come up with subscription for braking. Yeah, you want to hit the brake? It'll be $15. Yeah, but it does make sense. I understand why BMW is doing it. A lot of people don't use it. So, but still the car is yours, right? So, and they're giving you subscription models for certain services provided by the car. So, what are your thoughts? Would you pay for that?
You know what? Like in B school, we were taught the when you think about the supply demand curve, and
Oh yeah.
when you're trying to like when you're thinking about pricing, and you're trying to construct, like pricing is typically dictated by willingness to pay, and willingness to pay is typically
Mhm.
where your demand and supply curves intersect. But
Yes.
that's primarily dealing with fixed costs. Now,
Yeah.
the beauty of subscription is like whatever producer surplus, consumer surplus you have, like in this regard, you're going to be dealing with consumer surplus. Subscriptions erode consumer surplus entirely. Like that was the one bit that you had not captured just yet. Think about like here you have clubs, right? Like your British era clubs, like your Gymkhanas, your Walter clubs, what have you. There are
Yeah.
instances where you have large fixed costs. And there are instances where they have fixed costs plus a subscription. Your gym
Yeah. I
membership,
mean,
right? Like at the end of the day, you are dealing with consumer surplus. Automotive manufacturers have finally cracked that. So subscriptions are great for them, so long as they are able to apply them.
great for the companies, not for the customers.
Yeah, I mean it's eroding
Yeah.
consumer surplus. So yeah, but here's the thing: like
Yeah.
there are instances where, like, if you are profitable enough, you can pass back some of that profit to your consumers. I'm not saying brands are going to do that, but I'm just saying like that could create a pricing opportunity again. Like if I have to compete with you and you're another manufacturer, I can pass on some of these gains to my consumer, like at a discount, an initial discount, just to build retention and loyalty.
Yeah, more like like how the internet service providers do. Buy it for 10 months. We're gonna give you 2 months free. So we get 10 months of you pay for heated seats, but 2 months the company gives you for free.
Yeah, during peak summer, you get heated seats for free. That's a fantastic idea. All right,
Yeah.
final question, sir. Where do electric vehicles make sense? Like we've talked about the batteries, like the problems with batteries. You've talked about the problems with EVs with respect to infrastructure.
Hmm.
You've talked about the future of vehicles. Is there a future for electric vehicles? You said at
Yeah,
the
I
start of
do.
the like in one conversation you had talked about how EVs make sense, that EVs are growing. Where, like, are you
EVs
seeing
are
this in the
grown.
passenger? Are you seeing this in the passenger vehicle segment or a different segment altogether?
No, passenger vehicle segment especially. First things,
Okay,
if you look at it, EVs are trying to come into. I mean, they are their growth has slumped in the first world countries, but if you look at it, they EVs are coming heavy in India, right? So there was this company BYD which was trying to
build your
come into
dreams.
India with a $1 billion investment, but India said no for a Chinese investment, but they're okay. They're in talks with Tesla right now with a $2 billion investment with conditions, right? So Tesla was asking to lower duties from 100% to 15% for the first 2 years. So there's talks going on, but there is a huge push to come to countries like India, and there's a huge growth for them.
Understood. Alternatively, I would say that not alternatively, I would say that for me, electric vehicles make a lot of sense when in certain segments, like with commercial vehicles, as an example. You remember when we were
Mm,
talking about, like, look at some of the problems that we addressed. We talked about infrastructure, we talked about how, like, it could potentially cause range anxiety, like, when you're looking at
mm,
changes in plans. Now commercial vehicles, they have their paths set. Like, I know that I'm going to travel from point A to point B largely, like without deviation, or with very little deviation. I'm going to travel from point A to point B. Now pit
yeah,
stops are planned in, like I am going to stop. So if I'm stopping for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I could just recharge my vehicle a little bit. That's
yeah,
okay. If I am looking at, and another thing is commercial vehicles, there are certain aspects that are well maintained and certain aspects that aren't. Like, anecdotally speaking, I see a lot of commercial vehicles produce a lot of emissions, the unchecked emissions, because
yeah.
there you're looking at
Diesel.
runtime. You're looking at runtime more than anything else, right? Like, so long as the vehicle is
Mm,
moving, you are making money. So to stop and then to make sure that it's within a certain degree of compliance is not in your interest necessarily. Like, you're not incentivized just yet. So I was thinking, like, if you could maybe bring in electric vehicles in the commercial vehicle segment, even with respect to Ubers as an example. Like, you have Blue Smart in Delhi and in Bangalore, and Blue Smart, like, beyond, like, their operating model is fantastic. Vehicles come
yeah, the
in and charge
swappable
at a certain,
batteries.
not just that, like, so I spoke to a Blue Smart driver in Bangalore, and what they said is that they have fixed hours, as opposed to with Uber,
Hmm.
where you're your own person, right? Like, Uber is giving you, they're
Yeah.
paying you per ride. You're incentivized to get a
Yes.
certain number of rides. Whereas Blue Smart, you're an employee. Like, you are being paid a
Oh wow.
certain fixed
Okay.
cost. Overtime is rewarded. Like, you get a certain price for overtime, and the company is incentivized to not give you overtime, right? Um,
Yeah.
with Blue Smart, you are treated as a, like, the operating model is fantastic. It's got precious little to do with our conversation right now, so I'm not going to get into their operating model. But it's a solid operating model, and your vehicles are charging overnight, and it's a growing use case. Blue Smart last year, like from last year to this year, has, I don't have the figures, but I know that they've grown. Like, again, anecdotal, like last year you could get a Blue Smart quite easily. The capacity was low from what the drivers were saying versus what the drivers are saying now. Capacity has increased.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard to book a Blue Smart. You have to be like a day or two, you have to book a car a day or two ahead. So it's growing for sure. So based on that evidence alone, I would say that commercial vehicles have a future in electric vehicles. Two wheelers have a future in electric vehicles because, again, you're driving very short distances, so you don't need to worry about, and the consumption is lower, right? Because the weight of the vehicle
Yeah.
is lower, so you don't have to worry
Yeah.
overly about range. That range anxiety doesn't come in. Your cost of consumption doesn't isn't necessarily as big as if you owned an electric vehicle, the
See, the
like
range
a
anxiety can be evaded with swap batteries, right? There's companies in Bangalore and Hyderabad which are doing with scooters. Just go, if your battery's done, just swap the battery and keep going. So there's no problem of, like, oh, you're
yeah. But
stuck with
until
150
batteries evolve to that
kilometer.
point, until batteries evolve to
Yeah,
that point, like these are
yeah, man.
things that really work.
I agree. Blue Smart is a fantastic idea.
Anyway, so that was quite a lot that we covered. Why EVs? Why do brands want EVs? The problems with EVs, why companies are sold on EVs primarily, that one bit on what automotive manufacturers aren't telling you. And
Yeah,
we also explored the future of cars, what
yeah,
it'll take off, hydrogen. We didn't talk about ammonia ICE in this conversation, but we did in a previous podcast. We talked about the Toyota, like just as a quick recap. A Toyota subsidiary is exploring ammonia ICEs.
mm,
Um, Further, I would say that Toyota is also exploring solid state batteries, and they're in no rush to bring electric vehicles into the market. They're still comfortable with hybrids, and I think at this
great.
point in time, considering the technology that we have right now, the infrastructure that we have right now, hybrids make a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Well, I think that was. I think I had a great conversation, man. So, what do you think?
All right, like it's time to pat ourselves on the back and
Yeah.
ask for
Well, like,
subscribers.
comment,
And
subscribe. Yeah.
all right, thank you. See you on the next one.
Thank you, guys.